If you're in an active job search and you've been rejected for being quote-unquote overqualified, there's a really good chance that you're a victim of age discrimination. As a corporate recruiter, I'm actually going to share with you why. Hey everybody, it's Brian from Life After Layoff, and today we're going to be talking about the concept of ageism. So if you've been a victim of ageism, let's talk about some of the reasons why and maybe some of the strategies that you can use to kind of combat that. I am a corporate recruiter with over 20 years of experience. I've hired thousands of people into some of the world's most prestigious and well-known companies, so I know a thing or two about hiring. Now, if you're in the latter part of your career and you find yourself unemployed, you're probably going to be doing a lot of job searching, looking for roles that maybe are appropriate for where you most recently were, and you're probably going to be looking at roles a couple steps below where you were, just to get your foot in the door somewhere, prove yourself with the idea of hopefully you can get back to where you used to be and continue your career. Chances are you've probably been rejected more than once. Now, a company's not necessarily going to come right out and say you're overqualified for the position in a base level rejection, but if you actually get into an interview process, you might actually get that feedback. We think you're great for this role, we think you have all the skills, but we're concerned that you might be a little overqualified. What does overqualified mean? That essentially means that they either don't want to pay you what they think you're worth, or essentially they're discriminating based on age. So I want to talk about some of those reasons why or how companies use that thought process and what you can do about it. Now, this is going to assume that you are applying for appropriate positions. So you're not applying for a position if you're a director level or a CEO level and you're applying for an entry level position. That's going to kind of you're not going to get a realistic consideration for that because you're just way overqualified, and I don't think anybody's going to argue that. But if you're applying for positions that are reasonable, maybe it's you were at a manager level or you're a director level and you're applying for a manager level, or if you're at a manager level and you're applying for a senior level individual contributor, I don't think that there's such a huge gap there, and a lot of times that's where you'll find this subtle age discrimination coming into play. There are some positions, though, that in a corporation we do look at as feeder positions. Now, I'll use this as an example. I was in charge of a college recruiting program. We called it an engineering development program. The idea was to bring in young entry level or near entry level engineers into a variety of roles in plant-based settings, and then they would kind of move around over a course of 2 years. So it was a developmental program specifically catered to identify future leaders and then get them into positions where we could develop them. So it was a 2-year program. At the end, they would be permanently placed into a position where they could continue to grow, hopefully into a career path that led to leadership, whether it's technical or actual leadership. It's leading people. So we wouldn't look at somebody that even had 5 years of experience working. Even though they may have all the skills that we'd be looking for, it still defeated the purpose of that program. So in that case, would that be considered age discrimination? Probably not. It's really more you're kind of defeating the purpose of that role. But in a lot of cases, companies will have positions, or they'll just have it's a lower level position. It's not necessarily designed with a period of time where, like in the engineering development program, they did 2 years. But in this, and maybe in this position, they don't really have a defined time frame. They're just saying that over the course of time, they want this person to be able to grow. And I hear that all the time as a recruiter, where a hiring manager would say, we want this position, we want somebody that has growth opportunity. This has growth opportunity. We want to hire somebody that has the potential to grow with the role. And that's where it kind of gets into a slippery slope, because if you don't put defined time frames and a defined program in place, what exactly does growing with that role even mean? And I think that that's where you can get into very subtle age discrimination, which I actually feel like is pretty common. I've had this conversation with more than one hiring manager, and it does get to be pretty slippery. And I actually usually coach them and say, hey, you got to be careful here, because you're potentially going to be eliminating candidates that would be willing to work this position, who are qualified and would be okay with that wage range. And so if that's you and that's where you are in your career, where you're actually getting rejected for positions where you're thinking like, hey, I actually would qualify and be pretty good at that. I've done that role before, and I'm actually okay with taking a step backward in compensation to maybe go a couple steps forward again. It can be very frustrating as a job seeker. And I get it. I've actually experienced it myself. So I know what that feeling is like when you see those positions, and then you know that you could be really effective in. But what's happening typically behind the scenes is they look at your resume and they say, this person's doesn't fit the mold. That's usually what it is. They're not going to be able to grow with the company. And that's when I would caution and say, what does that mean? They can't grow with the company. Are you saying they can't qualify for a more advanced role? Because they've actually proven that they can do the advanced role. So now it's just a matter of getting that shot. But again, we have to make sure that we're age appropriate, or not age appropriate, role appropriate for the positions that we're applying to. So if you're the CEO and you're applying for an entry-level engineering position, there's a valid concern on the hiring manager side. So I just wanted to preface it by saying that. But if you're reasonably qualified and you're able to do the work and you're willing to live with the wage, that is definitely something that I hear from hiring managers is kind of that discriminatory, it's a very subtle discrimination. In fact, I don't even think half the time they even know they're doing it. So what are the concerns in that circumstance from the company for somebody that is clearly overqualified for the position? So I think one of the things that they would typically bring up is they had a vision for this position. Now, this is probably where the vision could be considered discriminatory. Like, okay, your vision needs to still be legal. So I've had that conversation with more than one hiring manager where I'm saying you can't have a vision that's going to discriminate. And that, again, it becomes a very subtle thing. So it's kind of like a under the table type of thing, which is something that you really need to, if you're watching this and you're a hiring manager, you really need to coach your teams on what does that look like for you. But they could look at you as potentially somebody that is a flight risk. So in other words, and this is a very real concern, if you come in a position and you've accepted a much lower salary than you really command on the open market and when kind of normal times, the concern is that once a better job comes along, you're going to be out the door. And let's be realistic. If you're applying for a position and you take a job that you are overqualified for, are you going to continue to look for a position? Because if you are going to continue to look for a position and you're realistically not stopping your job search, then realistically their concern is kind of founded at that point, right? So that is a very real concern that you will be a flight risk if you come in, you work, if you're clearly overqualified. The second major reason or concern that an employer might have of somebody that's quote unquote overqualified is if you've got a company, I'm thinking like maybe a startup company of some sort, and it's really kind of a hip, young, influenced company that's really kind of happening. I'm thinking like Silicon Valley type stuff. And you come in from a very traditional workforce and maybe you're in the twilight of your career, there's a concern, are you going to fit in with the group, from a cultural perspective, not even necessarily from an age perspective. Or it could even be that, do you have the most up-to-date and current skills to do this position? Do you have the ability to kind of push the group or raise that bar from what they were working on? Can you bring in new skills? Now, there's an argument that a senior level worker who has a lot of experience could potentially come in and bring that kind of a coaching mentality or bring in some historical perspective of, kind of maybe a missing piece to that puzzle that employers are not necessarily thinking about. But in general, they could worry about your lack of skill or how you would fit into that culture. So if you are in this situation where you are a job seeker and you are wondering how to get around this ageism obstacle, and it is a very real obstacle, what do you do? As far as you can't necessarily scream and yell, and it's really hard to prove ageism unless they're actually sitting there saying that we're not going to hire you because of your age, and it's kind of a system-wide thing. I mean, you certainly have legal avenues that you can go down for that, but when you are looking at what you can do as a job seeker to actually get the job versus kind of fighting the system, what can you do? And really it's up to you to minimize those concerns and cover up as much of the weakness, the perceived weakness as possible, and highlight why you would be a good fit. So that's what you have to do in order to really get noticed by those recruiters and really have kind of a shot at getting through that process and getting past those. I mean, because let's face it, it's an employer bias. And it's very frustrating employer bias, and I talk a lot about on my channel about employer bias. I talk a lot about on my LinkedIn about employer bias, and I try to highlight it because I want my fellow recruiting friends to start to think maybe we're being biased in our hiring practices, and And frankly, a lot of them are. There's a lot of good employers too, so I'm not saying that everybody does that, but it's just a way I've been trying to help highlight some issues that I see in hiring. But as you as the job seeker, it's going to pay for you to be creative. You're going to have to think outside of the box, and that's actually a core competency for kind of these hip, young vibe type of workforces. They want somebody creative. They want somebody that's vibrant. They want somebody that can hit the ground running with a lot of energy. So in your job search, you should be showing that from a creativity perspective. And if you've got a really outdated resume, right, that's probably or you got something old school on your resume that would indicate that you're old school. It's something that you really want to think about. How can you make sure that you've got the most modern looking document that you're sending out that really doesn't age you in any way or put any red flags? There's subtle things. There are ways to write your resume and some of the other tools that you can kind of minimize or kind of strategically position yourself kind of beyond the purpose of this particular video. I actually have training courses for those, so if you're struggling with ageism, make sure you head over to my website, lifeafterlayoff.com. I've got a couple of training courses. One is how to write a resume. It's called Resume Rocket Fuel. It actually helps you kind of strategize how to write your resume from an ageism perspective, among many other common issues that people are experiencing. It's really a great thing. If you are looking for resume help, that's where I would start with. It's the most cost-effective thing. And then I also have a course called the Ultimate Layoff Bootcamp, which is kind of dedicated to getting you through the hiring process with strategy and purpose in mind. That'll also help with ageism. Okay, enough of the plugs, but I did want to mention that you can actually strategically approach those tools to help you sell yourself and kind of minimize the impact of ageism. But we want to make sure that our resume is up to date. It's not showing any signs. I mean, even things like email addresses can be used against you. So if you're using a Hotmail address, and quite frankly, I actually have a Hotmail address that I use. Now it's kind of turned into my junk email, but I do have a Hotmail address that I use, or if you have an AOL. I don't agree with it, but there are people out there that will date you for that. So just keep modern, create. I mean, Gmail is free. Use a Gmail account. You just want to take away any possibility of somebody looking at you from a date perspective. Now, another question that comes up a lot is this concept of schooling. Okay, if you list out, and I think that it's almost like a should be an illegal question, what years you went to school, because if they're requiring you to answer that question, they're essentially requiring you to disclose your age. And if you're somebody that graduated from college in the 70s or 80s, I mean, that's kind of really showing your age, right? So you're kind of painted into that. I do believe that should be illegal or not asked on an application, but there are still companies that do that. If I was me, I would actually just put kind of a generic 0000 and make it look like you graduated in year 2020 or sort of make it current or something like that, or maybe just make it 10 years ago, and just put a generic dates. Just I wouldn't indicate it. All you need to list. All I need to know as a recruiter is, do you have the degree? I don't need to know when you graduated from school. It doesn't help. It doesn't have any bearing on the rest of your application. So if you're a company watching this, please remove that from your requirement. That should not be on there. But that's something that you can put on your resume too, is remove the dates from your schooling. There's no reason I need to see that as a recruiter. There's no reason why you need to highlight that as a job seeker, so get rid of it. You don't need to have that. The other thing that I want to talk about is LinkedIn. If you are not using LinkedIn, that's really going to be your best friend. So that's a way to connect directly with the hiring managers that you might be interacting with. It's a chance to show that you are tech savvy, that you're network savvy, and you can go in and establish good rapport with a hiring manager with the potential of getting around a hiring process, or kind of getting bounced out as a gatekeeper. Recruiter's a gatekeeper. So if you kind of connect with me, you show me your value. You're not necessarily just pitching me. Like, don't write me and say, hey, you have a job that I want, consider my resume, because that's going to make me not look at your resume. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. I don't like it when candidates do that. But if you want to just write a quick note to me, connect with me, and then start showing value. Let me see, because I'm on LinkedIn constantly. Let me see your name popping up in my feed with, you're making good comments on other people's stuff. Maybe you're engaging on my stuff. Write a note or a comment. Be a regular engager. Maybe like some stuff. Maybe put out a post or write an article or show that you're current. Make a video and throw it up there, so that you can show that you have personality, that you have vibrancy to you, that you can, it's really kind of your network is going to be your best friend in that regard. So there are a lot of things that you can do to try to combat it. Are they going to work 100% of the time? Unfortunately, they're not. If you are kind of in the twilight of your career, I do have, that's why I actually put together a Life After Layoff, is to help folks just like you. It is not an easy, it's not an easy situation that you're in, and I'm not trying to sugarcoat it. You do have challenges that other people might not have. It's hard enough to find a job even when you don't have that issue going against you. But when you're in the twilight of your career, it gets much harder because people want to know that you're going to be around for a while. And if you're 62 and looking for a position, they're thinking, okay, you're going to retire in 2 to 3 years, which, kind of funny is that people are not lasting longer than 3 years in most companies these days. But a bias from an employer is that if they're not going to be here for at least 10 years, I'm not going to be interested in them. Which is really kind of crazy, because you look at the hiring manager's resume and they've probably only lasted 3 years in most of their employers. So it is very frustrating. I totally get it. It is something that I've tried working with my hiring teams, and I will continue to do so. But it is what it is. So we have to try to manage it, and we have to approach things with strategy. And that's really kind of the bottom line of it. If you're struggling, again, check out my website. It might help you. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. I bring out a lot more videos, and I don't think you're going to want to miss any of them. I actually do a few one-on-one sessions. If you think you need specialized help, you can reach me through my website as well. But otherwise, just wanted to say thank you for watching this kind of long, convoluted video, and hopefully it helps somebody, and I wish you the best of luck. Keep me posted on your job search. Leave a comment below. Actually, if you've been a victim of ageism, let me know. I'm just curious to see how many people, if I'm just kind of rambling here, but if you've been a victim of ageism, let me know. Leave a comment and kind of describe your situation. And who knows, maybe we can try to help kind of point you in the right direction. Anyway, thanks for watching. I will see you on the next one, probably later on this week, and appreciate all your time. Thanks, guys.